In the quiet corridors of royal protocol, where every gesture carries the weight of history and every appearance speaks volumes about loyalty, betrayal, and redemption, one woman stepped forward when the world least expected it. She had been cast out, criticized, and forgotten by many, but when duty called and honor demanded a response, Sarah Ferguson proved that sometimes the most powerful statements come not from those who never fell from grace, but from those who found the strength to rise again. This is not just a story about royal obligation or ceremonial tradition. This is the story of a woman who, despite years of scandal and separation from the inner circle of the British royal family, chose to honor the memory of the woman who had been both her greatest supporter and her most complicated relationship. When Queen Elizabeth II passed away, leaving behind a legacy that spanned 7 decades, it was the Duchess of York who surprised everyone with a public appearance that would redefine her place in royal history and remind the world that true nobility comes not from titles, but from the courage to do what is right when it matters most. The morning mist clung to the ancient stones of Windsor Castle like secrets refusing to be told. Sarah Ferguson stood at the edge of the courtyard, her hands trembling not from the September chill, but from the weight of the moment that lay ahead of her. For 36 years, she had been part of this world, and for 26 of those years, she had been on its periphery, watching from a distance as the family she had once called her own moved forward without her. The call had come 3 days earlier. Prince Andrew's voice, strained with grief and exhaustion, had cut through the usual awkwardness that marked their conversations. The Queen was gone. Elizabeth II, the woman who had welcomed Sarah into the royal family with cautious optimism and had watched her leave with disappointed silence, had passed peacefully at Balmoral. The funeral arrangements were being made, and there was something Andrew needed to discuss with her. Sarah had expected many things during that phone call, but not an invitation to participate in the official mourning proceedings. She had been divorced from Andrew since 1996, had been largely excluded from major royal events for decades, and had built a life separate from the monarchy that had once defined her every breath. Yet here was her former husband, speaking with a formality that barely concealed his emotional exhaustion, asking if she would consider making a public appearance to honor the Queen's memory. The request caught her completely off guard. Sarah had spent years rebuilding her reputation, writing books, championing causes close to her heart, and raising their daughters Beatrice and Eugenie with as much normalcy as possible given their circumstances. She had learned to exist in the shadows of royal life, supporting her family from a respectful distance, while maintaining her own identity apart from the titles and expectations that had once suffocated her. But this was different. This was about Elizabeth, the woman who had been the one constant through every storm, every scandal, every moment of joy and heartbreak that had defined Sarah's relationship with the royal family. The Queen had been present when Sarah had walked down the aisle of Westminster Abbey in 1986, radiant in her belief that she was embarking on a fairy tale. Elizabeth had been there through the difficult years that followed, when the pressures of royal life had begun to crack the foundation of Sarah's marriage to Andrew. And she had been there, silent but watchful, during the painful years of separation and divorce that had left Sarah feeling like a stranger in the only world she had ever truly known. The decision to accept Andrew's invitation had not come easily. Sarah spent 2 sleepless nights walking through her home, remembering conversations with the Queen that had shaped her understanding of duty, service, and sacrifice. She recalled the private moments when Elizabeth had shown her kindness that the public never saw, the quiet conversations about motherhood and responsibility, the gentle guidance offered during the most challenging periods of royal life. Elizabeth had been a complex figure in Sarah's life, representing both the opportunities and limitations of royal existence. The Queen had welcomed her with genuine warmth initially, seeing in Sarah's enthusiasm and natural charisma qualities that could bring fresh energy to the monarchy. But she had also been the guardian of traditions and protocols that Sarah had struggled to navigate, the final arbiter of royal standards that Sarah had sometimes failed to meet. The most painful memory was from the years immediately following the divorce, when Sarah had felt like a ghost haunting the edges of royal events, present for their daughters, but excluded from the family gatherings that had once been her world. The Queen had maintained a careful distance during those years, not out of cruelty, but out of a deep understanding of the complex dynamics that Sarah's continued presence might create. Yet, even during the most difficult periods, Elizabeth had never completely closed the door on Sarah. There had been subtle gestures of support, quiet acknowledgments of Sarah's role as mother to the Queen's granddaughters, and an implicit understanding that while their relationship had become complicated, it had not been entirely severed. Standing in the courtyard now, Sarah felt the weight of all those years pressing down on her shoulders. She wore a simple black dress, appropriate for the solemnity of the occasion, but devoid of any royal insignia or indication of her former status. She had deliberately chosen to present herself not as the Duchess of York returning to claim her place in the royal hierarchy, but as a woman paying her respects to someone who had profoundly influenced her life. The media attention had been intense from the moment word leaked that she would be making an appearance. Photographers and reporters had gathered outside her home. Speculation had filled the newspapers and social media, and royal commentators had debated the appropriateness and significance of her participation in the morning proceedings. Some criticized the decision, arguing that Sarah's troubled history with the royal family made her presence inappropriate during such a solemn time. They pointed to the scandals that had marked her later years as a working royal, the financial difficulties that had followed her divorce, and the way her relationship with the monarchy had been characterized by conflict and misunderstanding. Others saw her appearance as a powerful gesture of reconciliation, a demonstration that the bonds forged through marriage, motherhood, and shared experience could transcend the formal structures that had sometimes divided the family. They argued that Sarah's presence honored not only the Queen's memory, but also the complex reality of modern royal relationships, where divorce and separation did not necessarily mean complete estrangement. For Sarah herself, the decision had been about something much simpler than public opinion or royal protocol. It had been about honoring a woman who had shown her both the possibilities and responsibilities of public service, who had demonstrated through her own example what it meant to dedicate one's life to something larger than personal happiness or individual ambition. As she walked toward the chapel where the private family service would be held, Sarah felt a strange sense of coming home. The familiar weight of royal scrutiny, the careful choreography of public appearances, the knowledge that every gesture would be analyzed and interpreted, all felt both foreign and familiar after so many years away. She thought about Beatrice and Eugenie, who had grown up navigating the complex terrain of being royal granddaughters with a mother who existed outside the traditional royal structure. They had handled the situation with grace and maturity that often amazed her, maintaining loving relationships with both sides of their family while forging their own identities in the modern world. The service itself would be small and intimate, restricted to immediate family members and closest personal friends. Sarah knew that her presence there represented something unprecedented in recent royal history, an acknowledgement that the traditional boundaries of royal relationships had evolved to accommodate the realities of contemporary family life. As she approached the chapel doors, Sarah paused for a moment to compose herself. She was here not as the Duchess of York, not as Prince Andrew's former wife, not as a figure from the monarchy's complicated past, but as a woman who had been profoundly shaped by her relationship with Queen Elizabeth II and who wanted to pay her respects in the most meaningful way possible. The doors opened before her, and Sarah stepped inside, ready to honor the memory of a woman whose influence on her life had been immeasurable and whose legacy would continue to guide her long after this day of mourning had passed. Inside the chapel, the soft light filtering through stained glass windows cast gentle patterns across the ancient pews where Sarah found herself seated among faces that had once been as familiar as her own reflection. The years melted away as she looked around at family members she had known during the happiest and most turbulent periods of her life. King Charles, now bearing the weight of the crown, sat with Camilla at his side, their expressions grave with the responsibility of leading the nation through this period of mourning. Prince William and Catherine sat with their children, who fidgeted quietly in their formal clothes, too young to fully comprehend the magnitude of what was happening, but old enough to understand the solemnity required of them. The sight of these young royals, representing the future of the monarchy, stirred something deep within Sarah as she remembered her own daughters at similar ages, trying to understand their place in this extraordinary family. Across the aisle, Beatrice and Eugenie sat with their husbands, their faces reflecting the complex emotions that Sarah knew they must be feeling. As granddaughters of the Queen, they were grieving the loss of their beloved grandmother. As daughters of Sarah Ferguson, they were also witnessing their mother's return to a world she had been largely excluded from for over 2 decades. The service began with ancient hymns that had echoed through this chapel for centuries, their familiar melodies carrying the weight of countless royal ceremonies, celebrations, and farewells. Sarah's voice caught as she joined in singing, "The Lord is my shepherd," remembering how the Queen had often spoken about her faith as the foundation that had sustained her through 7 decades of unprecedented change and challenge. Archbishop of Canterbury delivered a eulogy that captured both the public achievements and private character of Elizabeth II. He spoke of her unwavering dedication to service, her deep religious faith, and her ability to provide stability and continuity during periods of rapid social and political transformation. But for Sarah, the most powerful moments came not from the formal tributes, but from the intimate memories that surfaced as she sat in this sacred space. She remembered her first private audience with the Queen shortly after her engagement to Andrew was announced. Elizabeth had received her in a small sitting room at Buckingham Palace, surrounded by photographs of the royal family and personal mementos that revealed glimpses of the woman behind the crown. The Queen had spoken to her about the privileges and responsibilities of royal life with a directness that had both thrilled and terrified the young Sarah. "The monarchy is not about us," the Queen had said, her voice gentle but firm. "It is about service to something greater than ourselves. Everything we do, every public appearance, every private decision, must be weighed against this fundamental truth. The moment we begin to see our roles as being about personal fulfillment or individual happiness, we lose sight of what truly matters." Those words had haunted Sarah throughout her years as a working royal, particularly during the periods when the constraints of royal protocol had felt suffocating and the constant scrutiny had seemed unbearable. She had struggled to balance her natural spontaneity and warmth with the measured formality that royal life demanded. The Queen had watched these struggles with a combination of sympathy and concern, understanding the difficulty of the transition while maintaining her expectation that royal duties would ultimately take precedence over personal preferences. The most painful memory involved the conversation they had shared during the darkest period of Sarah's marriage to Andrew. The pressures of royal life, combined with Andrew's naval career that kept him away for long periods, had placed enormous strain on their relationship. Sarah had felt increasingly isolated and misunderstood, trapped between the public expectations of being a fairy tale princess and the private reality of struggling with depression, loneliness, and a growing sense that she was failing to meet the standards expected of her. During that difficult period, the Queen had requested a private meeting. Sarah had expected criticism or perhaps a formal warning about her public behavior, which had become increasingly erratic as she struggled to cope with the pressure she was facing. Instead, Elizabeth had surprised her with an expression of genuine concern and understanding. "I know this life is not easy," the Queen had said, her usually formal demeanor softening. "I was fortunate to marry a man who understood from the beginning what would be required of both of us. But you came into this family as a young woman with dreams and expectations that could not have prepared you for the reality of what we ask of those who serve alongside us." The Queen had gone on to acknowledge the unique challenges that Sarah faced as someone who had grown up outside the royal world, but was expected to immediately adapt to its demands. She had spoken about her own early struggles with protocol and tradition, and her gradual understanding that these structures existed not to constrain individual expression, but to provide a framework within which the monarchy could serve the nation effectively. The question, Elizabeth had concluded, is whether you can find a way to serve within this framework, or whether the cost to your personal well-being is too great to sustain. There is no shame in acknowledging that this life is not compatible with who you are meant to be. But if you choose to continue, you must do so with a full understanding of what will be required of you. That conversation had stayed with Sarah long after her marriage to Andrew had ended and her formal role within the royal family had concluded. She had come to understand that the Queen's words had been an act of kindness rather than criticism, an attempt to help Sarah navigate an impossible situation with dignity and self-awareness. Now, sitting in the chapel and listening to the readings from Scripture that the Queen had personally selected for her funeral service, Sarah felt a profound sense of gratitude for those difficult but honest conversations. Elizabeth had never tried to pretend that royal life was easy or that the sacrifices it required were insignificant. Instead, she had demonstrated through her own example how those sacrifices could be transformed into something meaningful and enduring. The service included readings from the Queen's children and grandchildren, personal tributes that revealed aspects of Elizabeth's character that the public rarely glimpsed. Princess and spoke about her mother's love of horses and the countryside, describing quiet moments at Balmoral where the Queen had found peace and renewal away from the pressures of official duties. Prince Edward shared memories of family gatherings where Elizabeth had been simply Granny, delighting in the achievements and adventures of her grandchildren and great-grandchildren. As these intimate portraits of the Queen emerged through the service, Sarah found herself thinking about the complexity of royal relationships and the way that public personas could sometimes obscure the very human emotions and connections that existed beneath the surface. Elizabeth had been many things to many people: sovereign, mother, grandmother, symbol of national identity, guardian of constitutional principles. But for Sarah, she had also been a teacher, a guide, and ultimately a woman who had shown her both the possibilities and limitations of a life lived in service to others. The most moving moment came when Prince William read a passage from one of the Queen's Christmas broadcasts, where she had reflected on the importance of family relationships and the way that love and forgiveness could transcend even the most difficult circumstances. As his voice filled the chapel, Sarah felt tears streaming down her face, remembering not just the Queen's public wisdom, but the private moments when Elizabeth had demonstrated those same qualities in her interactions with family members who had struggled, failed, and found their way back to grace. When the formal service concluded, family members began to file out quietly, each lost in their own memories and grief. Sarah waited until most of the others had left before standing to leave herself. As she walked toward the door, she noticed that Beatrice and Eugenie had lingered near the altar, their faces reflecting the same complex mixture of sorrow and gratitude that she was feeling. The three women embraced silently, no words necessary to convey their shared sense of loss and their appreciation for the opportunity to honor the Queen's memory together. In that moment, Sarah felt more connected to her daughters and to the royal family than she had in decades, bound together not by titles or protocol, but by genuine love and respect for a remarkable woman who had touched all of their lives in profound ways. Outside the chapel, the September afternoon had grown warm, and Sarah paused to collect herself before facing the inevitable questions and scrutiny that would follow her public appearance. She knew that her presence at the service would generate considerable media attention and commentary, with some viewing it as appropriate and others questioning the wisdom of including her in such an intimate family gathering. But for Sarah, the significance of the day lay not in public opinion or media coverage, but in the private act of honoring a relationship that had shaped her understanding of duty, service, and the complex bonds that connect families, both royal and ordinary. She had come to say goodbye to Queen Elizabeth II, and in doing so, she had found a measure of peace with her own complicated history within the royal family. 3 weeks after the private family service, Sarah found herself standing in her study, surrounded by hundreds of letters and messages that had arrived following news of her appearance at the Queen's memorial. The response had been overwhelming and far more positive than she had anticipated. People from around the world had written to express their appreciation for what they saw as a gesture of respect and reconciliation that honored both the Queen's memory and the evolution of modern royal relationships. Among the correspondence was a handwritten note from an elderly woman in Yorkshire who had written about her own experience of divorce and estrangement from family members, describing how Sarah's presence at the service had given her hope that broken relationships could find their way toward healing. Another letter came from a young mother who thanked Sarah for demonstrating that women could maintain their dignity and grace even when their lives took unexpected turns that didn't match society's expectations. But the most meaningful response had come from an unexpected source. 3 days after the service, a private secretary from Buckingham Palace had called to arrange a meeting between Sarah and King Charles III. The conversation that followed had been unlike anything Sarah could have imagined during the long years of her estrangement from the royal family. Charles had received her in the same sitting room where she had once met with Queen Elizabeth, and the familiarity of the setting had initially made Sarah nervous. But the new king's manner had been warm and appreciative, a marked contrast to the formal distance that had characterized their interactions for so many years. "Your presence at the service meant more to our family than you might realize," Charles had told her, his voice carrying the weight of both grief and genuine gratitude. "Mother would have appreciated the courage it took for you to be there, especially given how complicated things have been over the years." They had talked for over an hour about the Queen's legacy, about the challenges of royal life, and about the importance of family relationships that could transcend official roles and public expectations. Charles had spoken candidly about his own evolution in understanding the balance between tradition and change, between institutional requirements and human compassion. "Mother taught us many things," he had said toward the end of their conversation, "but perhaps the most important was that the monarchy must adapt to serve each generation effectively. That doesn't mean abandoning our core principles, but it does mean recognizing that families, even royal families, are complicated entities that don't always fit neatly into traditional categories." The conversation had concluded with an invitation that surprised Sarah even more than the original request to attend the memorial service. Charles had asked if she would consider participating in a charitable initiative that Queen Elizabeth had been planning before her death, a program focused on supporting divorced and separated parents in maintaining healthy relationships with their children despite changed family circumstances. "Mother believed that our own experiences, even the difficult ones, could be transformed into opportunities to serve others," Charles had explained. "Your journey through divorce, co-parenting, and building a new relationship with our family might offer hope and guidance to others facing similar challenges." The project would involve working with family counselors, legal experts, and social workers to develop resources for parents navigating separation and divorce. Sarah's role would be to share her own experiences and insights, while being careful to respect the privacy of her family and the dignity of all parties involved. The opportunity represented something unprecedented, a chance for Sarah to use her personal experiences in service to others, while potentially finding a new way to contribute to the charitable work that had always been at the heart of royal responsibility. It would allow her to honor the Queen's memory through practical action rather than ceremonial gesture, creating something lasting and meaningful from the pain and growth of her own journey. Sarah had asked for time to consider the proposal, knowing that accepting it would mean stepping back into a form of public service that would inevitably bring renewed scrutiny and attention. But as she sat among the letters from people whose lives had been touched by her simple act of attending the Queen's memorial, she found herself drawn to the possibility of transforming her own experiences into something that could genuinely help others. The decision became clearer when she spoke with Beatrice and Eugenie about the opportunity. Both daughters had been deeply moved by their mother's appearance at the memorial service, seeing it as a moment of healing that had honored their grandmother while demonstrating their own family's resilience and capacity for forgiveness. Granny always said that our purpose in life is to serve others. Eugenie had told her mother during one of their conversations about the charitable project. Maybe this is your way of finding that purpose again, of showing people that second chances and new beginnings are possible even when things seem completely broken. Beatrice had echoed similar sentiments, pointing out that Sarah's unique perspective as someone who had experienced both the privileges and challenges of royal life, followed by the necessity of rebuilding her identity and relationships outside that structure, positioned her to offer insights that could be valuable to many families facing similar transitions. The support from her daughters had been crucial in helping Sarah understand that accepting the charitable role would not represent a return to her former position within the royal family, but rather the creation of something entirely new. She would be working alongside the monarchy rather than within it, contributing her skills and experiences to causes that aligned with royal values while maintaining her independence and personal authenticity. As autumn progressed, Sarah began working with the development team for the new charitable initiative. The experience proved both challenging and rewarding, requiring her to reflect deeply on her own journey while finding ways to translate those personal insights into practical guidance for others. She discovered that many of the skills she had developed during her years outside the royal family, including her work as an author, public speaker, and advocate for various causes, had prepared her for this new role in ways she had not anticipated. Her ability to connect with people from all walks of life, combined with her hard-won understanding of resilience and reinvention, made her an effective advocate for families struggling with major life transitions. The project also allowed Sarah to work closely with organizations that had been supported by Queen Elizabeth throughout her reign, creating a sense of continuity between the Queen's legacy and Sarah's new contribution to royal charitable work. She found deep satisfaction in knowing that her efforts honored Elizabeth's memory while addressing real needs in contemporary society. 6 months after the Queen's passing, the charitable initiative was officially launched at a ceremony attended by several members of the royal family, including Charles, William, and Catherine. Sarah's role in the project was acknowledged and celebrated, marking a remarkable transformation in her relationship with the institution that had once seemed permanently closed to her. During her speech at the launch event, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She spoke about the Queen's example of turning personal experiences into opportunities for service, about the importance of resilience in the face of setback and disappointment, and about the possibility of finding new purpose even when life takes unexpected directions. Her Majesty taught me that true nobility comes not from avoiding mistakes or never experiencing failure, but from learning how to transform our struggles into sources of strength for ourselves and others, Sarah said, her voice steady despite the emotion she was feeling. This project represents my attempt to honor her memory by doing exactly that, by taking the difficult experiences of my own life and using them to help other families find their way through similar challenges. The audience's response was overwhelmingly positive, and Sarah realized that her presence there represented something significant not just for her personally, but for the ongoing evolution of the monarchy itself. The royal family had demonstrated its ability to embrace complexity, to find ways of including rather than excluding, and to transform difficult relationships into opportunities for growth and service. In the months that followed, Sarah's work with the charitable initiative gained national and international recognition. She traveled throughout the United Kingdom and to other countries, speaking with families, working with local organizations, and helping to develop resources that made a real difference in people's lives. The Queen's influence remained evident in every aspect of Sarah's new role. Elizabeth's emphasis on duty, service, and placing the needs of others above personal considerations provided a framework that guided Sarah's approach to her charitable work. The Queen's example of maintaining dignity and grace under pressure served as a constant reminder of the standards Sarah aspired to maintain in her public appearances and private interactions. More than a year after Queen Elizabeth's passing, Sarah reflected on how attending that memorial service had transformed not just her relationship with the royal family, but her understanding of her own purpose and potential. The simple act of honoring the Queen's memory had opened doors to opportunities for service that she had never imagined possible. The relationship between Sarah and the royal family had evolved into something that would have been impossible to predict during the difficult years following her divorce from Andrew. Rather than trying to recreate the past or pretend that difficult experiences had never occurred, they had found a way to build something new that honored both the lessons learned from previous challenges and the ongoing bonds of family and shared commitment to service. Queen Elizabeth II's legacy lived on through many channels. The charitable organization she had supported, the constitutional principles she had upheld, the family relationships she had nurtured, and the example of dedicated service she had provided to multiple generations. But for Sarah Ferguson, that legacy was most powerfully embodied in the second chance she had been given to contribute meaningfully to the causes and values that the Queen had championed throughout her remarkable life. The Duchess of York's solemn public appearance honoring Queen Elizabeth had become something far more significant than anyone could have anticipated. The beginning of a new chapter in royal service, the healing of long-standing wounds, and the demonstration that even the most traditional institutions could find ways to embrace change, forgiveness, and the complex realities of modern family life.